It would help if I unmuted. So welcome all to Webinar Wednesdays. I'm so grateful to have you here and that CAC has been hosting these all through this month and the prior month to make sure that we're staying on top of it through these unprecedented times. And so today we're going to kick off with Beyond Correspondence, Maximizing Your Media Power. And I'm Christina Clark. I'm your CACA trainer for today, June 10th, 2020. And I'm just very excited to be with you and share this important information. Before we kick off, just a few housekeeping. Please, I already see so many of you engaging in chat. Thank you. Yes, please let me know. Oh, hi. I got a hi, Christina. Thank you for one of my NCA participants. Please use the chat. We want you to engage it. I really want this to be a conversation between myself and all of you because you have a wealth of information and knowledge about this topic. And so I want to make sure that we're engaged with each other. We have some CACA folks here as well. Cassandra's on the line, our trainer elite to help us monitor the chat box and make sure we continue this conversation both on the chat and within the feed. So please continue to use that. I really appreciate it. As I mentioned, I really do want this to be a conversation. Media is so important as we move forward with the work we're doing. And I just am so glad that you're on to hear how you can really maximize not just your in-kind dollars, but your impact with the media you have moving forward. So as I mentioned of the live stream training, our goal is to really keep everyone engaged, to make this a conversation. And so CACA staff's there to monitor the chat box, make sure that I'm hearing what is going on and that we're making sure whatever needs you have are being met moving forward. I want you to remember this is just the beginning of the conversation. So CACA training staff is here for you if you have questions after this. We will have some Q&A at the end, but a lot of times if you're like me, you sit and let this all percolate and digest, and you might have questions later. And so that's what CACA staff will be there for. I also want to give you a heads up. We do have a shout out to mid-year training, but I also wanted to let you know that myself and one of my other great colleagues, Alex Windings, will be doing an even longer version of this, more in-depth, really helping you work through some press and press kits ideas and how to really have impact during mid-year. So if you aren't registered for mid-year, do that, because if you like this content, you'll get even more where we really do some hands-on, let's make you have some real powerful impact, how we can make your press release even better. So be thinking about that as we're going through this webinar, that there'll be a longer, more intense version of this during mid-year. So please be thinking about that. But like I said, as we go through, please put your questions in the chat box, let us know what you need. And then if something comes up afterwards, the training team is there for you as well. So why are we here? What I'm really hoping that you get at the end of this session is how that you can have and foster more productive relationships with media markets. And we're gonna talk about all the different media markets in a minute, but I really do want to say that when I'm saying this, I'm talking about everything from TV and radio through our bloggers and our influencers. And so really thinking comprehensively about media and how we can have our messaging have even more impact. The other part is how can we leverage media resources to assist in getting our word out about prevention messaging? And then how can we engage media markets, both local and statewide, from one-on-one meetings to more systematic coverage? And for me, this is what's so important. I was a coalition director for 10 years, and it took me a while to realize like I could break out of my rural media area to have even more of an impact. And so we're gonna talk about the idea, yes, a lot of you on here are probably already engaging your local newspapers, your local television stations. Maybe you have like one that does a couple shows on a local television station, but how can we even branch out to anything that your people watch in your service area? If they're watching the local news that's from a channel like 2 hours away, say like for us, we're Coffee County, Tennessee, we're watching the news from Nashville. That's covering my people are watching that. So how can I work with those news people too? So really talking about, it's great, have you engaged your newspapers and your media locally? Now let's talk about what else your people are reading and how we can make sure you're getting that messaging from them as well. So we're really going to talk about how can we continue to build that really important media partners that you have as important sector stakeholders within coalitions. So I wanted to take a minute and talk about why media and why now. And I think this really, I already knew I was doing this topic because I'm passionate about prevention, getting their messaging out there. But it really came to light for me as we've had, of course, this pandemic happening around COVID-19 and seeing the upstream work being done with public health. And I kept thinking, I'm like, this is why prevention's voice is so important. And when we have another issue in another wave, as you know, we always have a wave. We had the opioid wave come up, and we've had meth waves coming in terms of what the emerging drug trends are. And how do we really make it about a public health issue where prevention is first, just as important as talking about treatment and all those other things when we get really downstream a lot? How can we make sure that prevention is first? And when we're talking about these issues, we start doing it just like we're talking about hand washing and covering our faces with COVID-19. Right now, we know that these public health issues that are happening within this, the pandemic and the quarantine, the things happening, that it's going to put strain and cause people to use substances at a great degree. We know we're going to see that uptick because historically we've seen it. So how can we make sure we're having that voice about prevention right now as it contributes to that conversation? Media is also really important, as you all know, as people who are funded by different grantors, because this is a great way to show our reach and our impact. And so we're going to talk some about how we can get the numbers up and how we can make sure when we are using media that we're using the right media for the right target audience, and how you can structure the work you're doing with your implementation plan to match that so you're having that maximum impact. I'm sure many of your favorites right now, if you're thinking about how we can get in-kind dollars, if you're a drug-free communities grantee. The other thing is why media is because they are such an important partner in contributing to in-kind dollars. I know a lot of times we think of like, get the lawyer on board, get the pharmacist, we can count those hours if they're doing that work. But media is such a huge partner as well. And I think a lot of times, and I saw this when I first started in coalition work, that of course media is like, I have to be, on the outside. I can't be too involved because I need to be, I can't be partial to the work you're doing. But this is not about letting them cover the news story completely. It's teaching you how to be better media people. And that's what I want to ask. Yes, we're going to talk about how can you get your news story out there? How can you get coverage and impact on the work you're doing? But also how you can leverage these people that are in your backyard to teach you how to be better media people. Because obviously I didn't come from a media background when I first started in coalition work. My heart is in social work and social activism, which is why I got involved. But this is such a powerful impact. And it goes back to what my father's always said. He was right. I know parents are usually right. You figure out later in life on most things. Is that it's not about you knowing everything. It's about you surrounding yourself with the people who do know. And that's why engaging your media sector isn't just about, okay, how can we get our story out, but what can they teach me about better getting my story out? Right now is a time, as we know that there's a lot of people still in quarantine, or we're slowly getting back to office as normal. There's really time to plan and build capacity right now. And so now is a time to get your team together, to get your key stakeholders and talk about how can we really take the time to plan and build capacity around our media. Because I promise you, I know, like I said, I was a director too, how much work you have on your plate. And I'll repeat it. I know how much work you have on your plate. You have so many things. I used to always say, coalition work is like triage. Whatever's bleeding goes to the top of the list. And I truly get that. But if you take a few meetings to really do this now, it's going to be so important, have greater impact on your work later. So I encourage you to do this as you're doing your assessment and as you're building your logic models, to be thinking about how you layer media in there. And I'm going to show you some tactics to do that to make it as effective as possible. And if I lead you with anything, this is that final little point. Great media doesn't have to cost big money. And I'm really going to show you that throughout this webinar. It isn't about buying billboards. It isn't about paying for PSA placements. You can do this with little to no money at all and really have a huge impact if you build the partnerships and make the ask. And we're going to go through all of those points throughout this webinar. So first, I want, if you guys could utilize the chat box, I just wanted to check in with you and say, what is as you're thinking about this topic and joining this webinar, what is the number one thing you want to accomplish with engaging the media sector? You're thinking about the work you're doing right now. What is the number one thing you want to accomplish with engaging the media sector? So Jennifer said virtual fundraising. Brandon, I love that, accurate information. Promotion, engaging youth, positive social impact, recruitment, getting funding. Easy to understand, clear story we're sharing. Thank you. That's a great, yes, we are going to talk about that. A lot of youth engagement. We are wanting to increase our reach and the number of people getting our message out. Mary Lou Bell, okay, great. Expanding community. How to keep youth involved. Awareness through podcasts. Recruitment and youth engagement. Just, you guys are fast. Opportunities to increase partnerships. Hi, Janet. Positive social norming. Okay, great. This is exactly what I'm talking about moving forward. We're going to have a lot of these things that we're going to touch upon. And I do want to mention again, if there's more in-depth things you want to work on, that mid-year training we're going to go to is going to help you even more. This is going to be kind of a sneak peek and get you some of the really main points you need. But for some of the other stuff, you guys really, I encourage you, please come to the mid-year so I can work with you even more on some of these. But yeah, managing community perceptions, getting youth engagement, all of this can be done with media. And we're going to talk about the different ways you can layer it. So it's just not one story, one time, right? Because we really want to get away from just having where we're putting out one message. And it's great to have an article and it gets great reviews, but how can we build on that to continually have a prevention conversation with our media every single time? And so then I just want to finish with this one question, if you guys could answer in the chat. Does your coalition have a capacity building plan for media or a media plan in general? You can answer yes or no. Ooh, Victoria, yes. We have some yeses in there. I'm so proud of you. A media plan in general, yes. For those of you who are answering yes, how did you develop your media plan? What I mean by that is it based on each activity, or is it just like a chart of this is what we're going to do in October? If any of you could just share a little about your media plan in the chat box for the Better Group, the ones that said yes, they do have one. And if you're willing, feel free to upload it or share. We'd love any type of share, we'd love. Ours is based on community involvement and events happening throughout the year. So that's from Brandon. And I think probably, Brandon, when we get to one of the charts I'll show about laying it out, will be similar to what I'm talking about in terms of matching what's happening with the stories you want to get out to continue that conversation. That's great. Ronnie says meetings and activities. Awesome. So hopefully for those who don't have a media plan, we're going to talk about the different ways you can develop one alongside the work you're already doing. So you're not doubling down and making extra work for yourself. And for those that already have media plans, some ideas of making those even have more impact for you. Betty says we have a standing column with the local newspaper. Awesome. And that's some of the things that I knew that a lot of you would have. And it's just amazing when I see podcasts, radio shows, the columns in the newspaper that coalitions have. And that's what the coalitions who don't have that, let's talk about how we can get there. And for the ones who do, what are the next steps that we can continue to build on this engaging of the media? So the main goal of today's session is to increase your media involvement, no matter where, whether you're starting from 0, you're starting at 10, how can we move this forward and achieve some in-kind monetary dollars? Listen, my key takeaway on everything I do is sustainability and building capacity. And so with each sector you're involving, with each activity, how can we continue to build in that sustainability piece? So we'll be talking about that. And then some key takeaways is how to build effective partnerships. How can we conduct some media visits, including asking for that in kind of a PSA placement? And how can we do some proper media release development? I see Lori has her hand raised. Cass, how? Okay, Barry Smet asked, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the questions right now. Will today's sessions assist with developing talking points for prevention as a coalition and issue specific or a blueprint on how to create? So we will be talking about today, as I mentioned, the key takeaways, how can we build an effective press release? We're going to go over that format, as well as how we can conduct some actual meetings with key teams within the media, as well as how you would package that. So in the 2-hour one, that will happen during mid-year, we will get more into talking about how you create those exact talking points. Right here, I'm going to give you the basics of how to put together that team, what you need to bring to that team meeting, and how to continue making that media partnership as we move forward. Cassandra, did you have something?
Yeah, so just to clarify for everyone, just a couple of things if you haven't been on a webinar before. On your 2, make sure that you have the drop-down menu selected as all panelists and attendees, so you're sharing with everyone. If you have a question, instead of utilizing the chat box, please use the Q&A. We do not want your questions to get lost in the chat box. For those of you raising your hand, I'm going to defer to Christina whether or not you want to have live interaction. And then we can unmute them and allow them to talk. Otherwise, please put either your information in the chat box or your question in the Q&A box. Thanks.
I'm fine if we want to do live, Cassandra. If that's an ability to have Lori unmute herself, that would be awesome. Lori, would you like to do that?
If you lowered your hand, I can't see you anymore. When you raise your hand, it goes to the top and I'm more easily able to unmute you.
And Victoria, yes, this webinar is recorded and will be available for review after today's session. So yes, this is being recorded. So Lori, let me know, raise your hand again if you want to ask your question or put it in the chat box, and I'll make sure that we get that question answered. So the first thing I want to talk about getting into the content is how do we overcome the media maze? Because there's a lot out there. We're inundated with a lot of information. There's a lot of different ways of getting media now than in the past. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. But it can often feel like it's coming from lots of different directions. And as a coalition director, volunteer, worker, however, whatever your title is, that where do I start? And how do I make sure I'm having impact? And so what I would like, if you're feeling overwhelmed by media, is these 4 things really, is to think about more of the rocks with the layering. The layering approach is the most effective. So instead of just blurting it all out and getting it all out there, how can we build impact in stories? So we'll talk more about how we can do that. And to make sure your planning capacity surrounding the media sector, that it's not just one person. Like I always say, if you're a drug-free communities grantee, those 12 sectors are a starting point, not the end point. And so just having one media person involved, is it enough? And it doesn't mean that they have to sign a coalition involvement agreement. It could just be that they are going to be involved and work with you, teach you, guide you, whatever it is, and making sure that you're having multiple mediums of media involved, that you are talking to radio, TV, newspaper, influencers, streaming things. There's lots of different ways that people are getting information. And as coalition people, we have to be on the cutting edge just as much of making sure that information gets out there through those mediums as well. Again, establishing those media plans is really going to help overcoming being overwhelmed by media, and when to do, if we plan it out, the better. And of course, there's going to be, and we're going to talk about this, things that come up, emerging trends, stories that are really important that we need to have a voice on. And so how do we integrate that into our daily work so that when those points come up, those really pivots that we can make in the cultural and national voice that's happening in prevention, that we're really not being tone deaf to it, that we're listening every single day and making sure that we're jumping on those stories and having a voice on them. So really, like I said, thinking about it in terms of not we need to go in each one this direction. We're going to do social media over here. We're going to do stories over here. That we're really thinking about it in layers. Like we need that newspaper article. We're going to need these social media pieces. I'm going to talk to the streaming service, that you're building that message stronger and stronger with each media point that you have. So where do we start? And this just goes back to doing that maze and not getting overwhelmed. It really needs to be at the beginning, right? Because we are inundated with media messages on a daily basis, now more than ever with everything that's happening in our nation. So I just want you to think for a minute. We're all, from different areas of the United States and across the world. We're all different age groups. And I want you to take a minute and think, what are all the ways you received messages just this morning from local, state, and national sources? Just take a minute and think about just from you woke up to the time you had this webinar. all the different ways you received information. And then if you take a minute and start listing those in the chat box and be really specific. If it was your local station, put your local station. What are all the different ways you started getting messaging? So we got social media and meetings, email, text, social media. Social media is huge. Local and national TV, emails, feeds, public access, Google feed, national news, social media, NPR, Instagram, phone. And no, I get a lot from my phone. Email, text, social media, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. See, this is all, and the reason I wanted you to sit and think about this is really important. See, Netflix, thank you. I think it's so important. One of the things I added to this when I was thinking about this content again was how imperative the streaming is becoming and what people are watching. And do we have an ability to tap into that and how we can do it? I see a hand raised. We have a question. Went down. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so email, social media, text, streaming devices. This is all so important as you're starting to develop your plan to get out of, we are so across our boundaries, right? We're not just messaging from one county anymore or one city. Our people are being impacted. Our service area, so to speak, is being impacted by all these different media messaging. So how can we tap into those as we move forward with our prevention messaging? And one of the reasons I started even thinking about this more was I have Comcast cable, and even the screensaver now is a whole push on ocean reform and ocean pollution and showing all of our ocean reserves basically in the United States and pictures of that and saying donate to the National Ocean Association, things like that. And I was sitting there thinking like, why can't that be prevention messaging? And that's what we need to start asking ourselves. Why isn't that prevention messaging? So when I'm sitting in my home in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, that messaging is about me talking to my children about X, Y, Z. Like we need to be thinking about what are all the ways that people really truly get this information. Liz said neighborhood and next door. I'm on that as someone in a neighborhood. A huge way to get out information and a free way to get out information. I've watched people use that Nextdoor app. If you don't know what that is, it's a neighborhood app that shows, especially if you're in a homeowner association, all people can chat and have a forum to like say that they've lost their dog or they need a plumber. But it's also, I've seen people doing political messages on that, asking people to come to rallies, things like that. So again, we really need to be thinking huge about our impact and different ways we can get our media messaging out there. And that's why it's so important. If we're saying we're serving everyone, we need to get the messages to them. Just having a newspaper article, just doing a TV interview about important topics, we need to do more and we need to layer it. We still need to do those, but what else can we do to continue having that impact? And so this is, again, exactly what you just said, an idea of these are all the different things that we need to be touching upon at some point. And so with audio, we're talking about radio, we're talking about streaming, we're talking about podcasts, which I know there's some great coalition podcasts out there. So you guys are already doing great work, but how can we even get involved in other people's podcasts? What podcasts are our service recipients listening to, and how can we get involved with them? Television, local and national. Again, it's one of those things you need to ask in order to receive, right? And you'll be surprised what news stories can get coverage by just putting it out there. And we're going to talk about how you can do that moving forward, how you reach out and find these reporters. But again, making sure you're not just thinking about this small area in which you might live, or if you're in a bigger area feeling overwhelmed, like they already have too much going on, I'm not going to be someone they want to listen to. We really still need to make that work of getting out there and making sure we're getting our message heard. Print, newspaper, and magazines, obviously, social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all those, of course, we want to make sure we're out. Again, I added the streaming media about Netflix, Hulu, Tubi. I mean, Tubi alone has commercials still, so things like that. And then, of course, digital publications, blogs, and news sites, making sure that we're really getting the coverage we want in multiple ways is so important. And so when we talked about all those different ways, and I bring that up to first talk about, okay, now where do we go? We know we have all these different messaging. You can't hit all of them, but our first task is to assess. And as you know, coalitions follow the strategic prevention framework. That's what the National Coalition Academy is built on as well. And that first task within the strategic prevention framework is to assess our community. And what I ask you to do is, as you're doing your assessments going forward, or as an addendum to them now, is we need to assess and uncover the top media sources for our community. And not just generally, but specifically by demographic, right? Because if we are saying that we want to impact youth, I saw a lot of you talking about engaging youth. Are we going to go to the newspaper? Is that the first place they're reading? Are we going to go to a local TV station? Is that where they're getting their news? Probably not. They're probably getting it from places like Facebook, like Twitter, going to TikTok, doing Google feeds and things like that. So we need to make sure that we're impacting the people that we say we're impacting, and that we're getting that information out there so we can be more successful. And we're having, for smaller, doing the work and getting the most impact for that work, because like I said, we're all busy. And so the first thing is really getting some focus groups together, or just some listening sessions with different groups in your community, whether it's talking to the youth. And I encourage you, not just one group of youth, but if you're in a community like I was, there's different high schools. So making sure that you know what different high schools are looking at, because they are all different, especially if you're rural or urban. Just in my area, in a rural community, we had one high school that was very, very different in terms of the music they listened to and what they engaged with, versus our rural high school out in the county that was much more farm oriented. What they listened to and what they engaged with was different. But also parental groups. What are the parents listening to in your community? What are the older residents in your community listening to? What different target populations, whether it's Hispanics or whatever major population you have in your community, if you have veterans in your community, what are those people listening to? So if your implementation plan is about engaging parents, engaging youth, then what are those specific groups looking at and finding out? Also surveys, this is something I started instituting. It's awesome, it's quick and easy. Every community event, every meeting, asking where you heard about it. Now, of course, if it's an internal coalition meeting, they heard about it from an email. But if it's something like a community event you're having, or an open call meeting, something like that, what were the top places they heard about the meeting or heard about the information? Even we did kind of an environmental scans. We saw people wearing our t-shirts around town, or if we saw our prevention messaging out somewhere that we had not actively gone and asked for them to have, how did they get it? How are they hearing about us? We need to keep our ear to the ground to really figure out where people are getting the information about the coalition and the work it's doing. And so making sure every event you're asking where that information is coming from, as well as doing a general survey similar to the focus groups or listening session to just ask where you're getting your information from within this community. Where's the number one places you hear about news stories, breaking coverage, getting information about parenting, all of those things. And then as you're doing that, really thinking about the news sources that people are saying that they're going to, and figuring out what the reach of those news sources are. So your local paper, what is the length of time people are reading articles? How many new people are engaging with the information on their systems? And how many people are returning? And that's true, you can ask those questions of anything from billboard companies to media to podcasts to your news stations, all of those. And the reason I tell you to do that, even if it's something you're thinking about engaging, you haven't seen a lot yet of in terms of putting media out there, because what you'll do eventually is you'll get a sheet of paper, right? And you have all your major demographics that you're hitting, all your major implementation plan groups you're working with, and then where that they're getting their media from, and then the reach. And so as you're doing work, you say, okay, great. In October, we're planning all of this in October, or we're going to do a major push for youth engagement. These are the channels that we're going to target. This is how we're going to target them. And then you immediately have the reach that you're going to have that you could think that you could put into your evaluation plan, and then go back and track later to see if you're having that reach. So it's a really great way of quickly putting in a sheet. These are the people we're trying to hit. This is the media that they go to, and this is the reach of that media. So you can go, and when you start to plan your media, it's right there for you. When you're going to do all your communities, grant funding reports, your state funding reports, you're going to have everything in one place. And so to be successful, we really need to be able to target and uncover those top media sources. So folding this in is going to be really important. And as I mentioned earlier on, we really want to make sure that we're building these partnerships. We don't want to just throw information out and hope, like I see that splat right there, and hope it just hits somewhere. We want to be targeted. We want to make sure that our messaging is getting to the right people, and that the hard work we're doing, if we're going to spend time doing a press release or having press kits or doing a PSA, that it's actually going to go out there and live and have the impact we want to do. So doing this, building partnerships up front, is so important, because we want to have those relationships before we do a major ask of them, especially when we're talking about monetary value or help with public service announcements like PSAs. So this is just a little about how do we really engage them and engage media sectors and make sure that they're seeing us before we're doing that ask. And so this is, again, where research is so important. And again, really getting your key stakeholders involved, people from your coalition involved. This shouldn't just be staff doing the work. Getting a group together that is in charge for a short period of time, even of media capacity building or media partnership building, whatever you want to call it, a short-term action team, a committee, really helping the staff to form this is going to be important. So we really want to make sure, first I want to bring up, if we know how important social media is, we want to make sure we're following all the people that we want to start really talking to and listening to in terms of media. And so making sure we're following that media on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and following exact reporters that we know cover the things in which we're thinking about. In all the areas, there are certain reporters that are covering the opioids or covering substance use, or are more involved with the community-based organizations. Let's find those reporters and make sure that we're covering them and that we have them followed on all of these. We want to research what their target audiences are, like I said, the staff that's covering those, the subjects or articles or postings. We want to know their bio and LinkedIn background and how often they're doing this coverage. Because again, we want the right people putting out our message, so we want to do our research. If it's a reporter that doesn't look like they're gonna get out the messaging in the way we would like, then that's not the reporter we want to target, right? So we want to make sure that we're looking. And one of the ways to start this research, you'll see a helpful hint here, is for Google, if you put in WSMV.com as our channel 4 news for Nashville. And so if I put WSMV.com opioids into the search engine of Google, it will pull up all the opioid stories covered by them. And you can go in and see who was covering those stories, how well the topic was covered, if it was covered in a way that leans towards prevention, that you think that they would want to have a conversation about it, to see postings, what people are saying about it. So really doing your background, that's a really easy way of saying, hey, whether it's a newspaper site, a blogger site, however you want to do it, you can put it in the Google and find out a lot of that information I'm talking about in terms of their target audience, the staffing, and so on. So this is really important when we're thinking about who we want to engage and making sure it's the right person that we're getting to tell our story, and starting that partnership building before we have that ask. Is let's do our background. And what we did was really pull a Google Docs or however you share documents within your coalition and said, okay, this is the Channel 4 folder. This is the opioid folder within Channel 4. And then this is their target audience. These are some of the postings they've had on it. These are the bios of their main reporters we work with. We did the same thing for the Tennessean, which is our statewide paper, making sure that we're pulling in that content, because there's some people, yes, they were working on opioids. Some people are doing public health in general. So depending on our story, was depending on how we targeted and layered that story. So this really helps in making sure you're going to get the coverage. Because again, I know this is work that I'm saying to do right now, but as you're developing press releases later on and you're developing this content or talking points, you're able to immediately get to the right person who's going to get the story out there. So you're not doing all of this work and then not hearing your messaging get out there. So task one was to assess, right? We want to make sure that we're getting the right information to the right people. Then the second part is that building the relationship. And you really, again, want this to be personal. When you start this outreach, after you've done the research on this end, now it's time to be an ongoing and intentional effort with media. So this is where if you see a piece that you love that they've covered on prevention or on substance use in general in your community, to send them a meaningful message about that content. to really start making the outreach personal is important. And the story I have about this is I was working with a group that was doing rape and sexual assault prevention on college campuses. And they had a new app developed in order to alert people if something was happening. And we were trying to get it out nationally and working with individual states. And in Tennessee, what really we ended up finding out, because we did the research up front, was one of the main reporters was sitting on the board of a domestic violence agency in Nashville and had a really personal connection to this. And we're able to reach out because we did our research and say, listen, we think this is something that you're going to want to hear more about. And we were able to have a conversation about why this was important with her to do a one-on-one call. And then it ended up turning into a layered story of how we could talk about domestic violence, how we could talk about sexual assault, and about this app that could really help with that. And that's what I'm talking about. When we can find these personal connections, then we can build these media partnerships that allow us to build these multi-layer stories and conversation. And that's what we want. And sometimes that just starts with commenting on someone's content and saying, listen, this is great work and this is why. If you don't have, going on to the next thing, it says ask them to join one of your LinkedIn groups. If your coalition isn't on LinkedIn, I encourage it. If they're not part of different groups, in terms of like there's fundraising groups on there, grant writing groups, all that stuff, join one of those or make your own group and ask them to join, because the more they're part of the conversation and they start seeing the work you're doing, the more they're going to find ways to cover it. Again, and you know this, I'm preaching to the choir, send those personal invites to your meetings, to celebration, to community events, not just when you're asking for coverage, but just because you want them to be there to see the work that you're doing. And then of course, one-on-one meetings are so important, as I mentioned, especially when you find a connection like with the topic and the person, that personal connection with the topic, you really want to have those one-on-one meetings. We all like to have trouble finding emails. I'm a super sleuth when it comes to finding media emails online. But so one of the helpful hints is one of the ways you could do that is getting the LinkedIn Chrome extension or the website email-format.com can really help you figure out what those taglines, so you're getting to the direct reporter or the direct blog or however it is that information is going to be on there for you so that you can make that personal outreach. So how do we plan around media? And I'm very excited to see how many people out there said they do have a media plan, because that is the way we're going to move forward. It's not planned, it's not going to happen, especially with everything we have on our plates. So when we're talking about planning media, we really want a monthly outline and task out devoted to media related to implementation activities. Like I said, I don't want you guys to go crazy. You already have the work done, really, because you have these implementation plans, you have these strategies. Now it's talking about who is being impacted by these strategies and who needs to get the information, and knowing those different graphics and subsets, and then what they're listening to so that we can track out what we're doing. So if we're saying that we're going to work on a prom campaign, then we got to go, this is our target youth, these are our target parents that we want to talk to, these are the medias, and these are all the different ways we're going to do it. And again, we want to not be doing just that month. What are the stories we can lead up to that? So we're building that multi-layer approach, that we're having the conversation, not just in the month of October, or not just that 1 month when there's prom season, but we're continuing the conversation throughout the year, that people are continuing to hear the prevention messaging. Designate and train specific spokespeople for your organization on specific topics. And this is where I get back to, it's not just about the coalition staff. And sometimes we're not the voice that needs to be heard. It really needs to be from our stakeholders sometimes. And I think nothing pointed truer than that than with the opioid epidemic. The idea that people needed not just to hear from coalition directors, they needed to hear from their local pharmacists. They needed to hear from their doctor. They need to hear these people be the voice of this prevention effort moving forward. And so we need to train up our community coalition members to be the voice in specific areas. Now, you don't just pick anyone. We all know that. It needs to be the right people, but there needs to be at least a group of few people designated, not just talk about the organization, but even specific topics, so that they're the go-to person that you can get quotes from, that is trained the media to say it, so that it's not just, oh, here's the coalition again. It's, here is Richard Randolph, pharmacist, talking about this, and he's a member of the coalition. And so really making sure that you're training those. And again, I'm going to go into more detail of that at the mid-year as well, because we just don't have time in this 1 hour span to do that. But training and how to train your people is really important when we're talking about pivoting and framing media messages. Again, going back to the strategic prevention framework, it's really important that we're evaluating our impact routinely, utilizing that evaluation plan. And having the media involved with that, helps your numbers to prove that you're doing it, but also can say if our media isn't working. If we said we're going to impact this many people and we're not getting them out to the events, or we're not getting them the messaging they need, we really need to make sure that messaging is getting to the right people. And so that needs to be in that evaluation plan. And in terms of being able to pivot stories and making sure that we're staying on top of emerging trends, we need to find a way to systematize daily media tracking within our organization. So whether that's, for us, we always received multiple newspapers that we had interns, or that we had one of the staff members go through and pick out any major articles we need to know. Google Alerts, I still have at least 5 or 10, depending on which email account I'm using, that pop up for different things, whether it's opioids, whether it's funding, that I'm getting to make sure I can track. And just different ways of making sure that we're staying with our ear to the ground and really knowing what's happening within those. And so I want to take a minute and talk about that pivoting to prevention. And we're going to get more into the planning model in the next few slides, but I want to take a minute to talk about when we can pivot to prevention. Because as I mentioned, there's been lots of opportunities with the messaging out there with public health right now to have conversations about why prevention is so important. And we do need to leverage local, state, and national media stories to make sure that we're having a community impact and we're getting our prevention messaging out there. And so taking a moment and using the chat box, how are these relevant to our work? When we think about the work of substance use prevention, how is a jobs report and unemployment connected to our work? Take a moment to think about that and put it into chat. How is jobs report, the unemployment report, related to our work? Got increased unemployment affects substance use, stress, coping mechanisms. People use substances to cope and mitigate stress. Unemployment causes for substance. Yes. That's exactly what I'm talking about. I've seen a lot of this happen, especially when we're talking about violence in our communities and the idea of how quarantine was affecting domestic violence victims. I saw so many stories about that, and they did a great job pivoting how you could have a discussion about domestic violence when we're talking about quarantine. It's the same thing with prevention. We're talking about everything that's happening and that we're struggling with job loss in our country. We know historically, there's lots of articles you could pull. I even started pulling research on how Hurricane Katrina victims under the age of 16, the trauma of that impacted substance use in later generations. It impacts it, right? Traumatic events, big events, jobs report, it impacts their use. Amount of stress people experience because of COVID dramatically increases substance use. Yes, like that's what we're talking about. The idea that we could take these issues that are happening that are really relevant and say, okay, we need to have a conversation about prevention, about substance use, because these people, everyone is being impacted by this. How can we have a conversation about prevention so that we can prevent this uptick in substance use that we're going to see because people are stressed, they've lost their jobs, they're scared, they're worried about their shelter or housing. Whatever it is, we know we're going to see the uptick. So let's make that conversation happen. And same thing, and I wanted to also, we kind of talked about jobs reports and traumatic community events. What about big events or summer travel or things like a concert? How are those connected and relevant to our work? Takeout meals and sale of alcohol. Okay. Lots of things about adverse, thank you, Ruben, adverse childhood experience, impact is traumatic and persuasive. Yes, that's why we honestly, right now, that's why this media is so important, and us getting our messaging out is more important than ever, because these events are going to cause lasting impact within our communities. And we have the ability to try to stop some of what could be negative and turn it into a positive and have these discussions and stop some of the substance use before it starts. And that's the conversation we need to be having in our organizations. Thomas says social norms encourage drinking, smoking, maybe encourage something better like kittens and bacon. I mean, I could do bacon. Big events include increased access to alcohol and vaping. Yep. And I think this is also a great time to talk about this. I agree with that. We have Bonnaroo in my community, and if you don't know what that is, it's a huge, basically the Woodstock now. And one of the ways we pivoted, what is a lot of drugs and alcohol coming into our community, is helping them develop safety messages. And that's why the other thing I want to think about, yes, we need to think about risk factors, the jobs reports, big events happening. There's a lot of risk in those, but there's also some protective things that we can hang on to. Be like, great, you're planning summer travel. This is the perfect time in your car for 10 hours with your children to talk about these important facts. And so I want you to think both about not just, and I don't want to say negative because it's not negative, but remembering to also empower and talk about those protective factors. Great, you're spending time with your children this summer. You're going to be going on vacation. This is a great time to have a family dinner and talk about these talking points, and to talk about medication safety in your home, or to talk about alcohol and its impact on your family and giving them to us. So really thinking about, there's all different ways we can pivot the conversation to prevention. These are important conversations happening, but prevention should be a part of them as well. And so that's why, as you're looking at these stories that come in through your Google alerts or your newspapers, and you're seeing the impact and the major stories people are following, I challenge you, as you get those, to also say, how can prevention matter in this story? And then let's talk to the media about it so we can add on to the story. And it's really successful tactic, because if you're already covering, for instance, Bonnaroo, a big concert like crazy, being like, great, we also have some safety messaging that we want to do with them. Can we partner and have that story? And it does have more reach and more impact. So be really thinking about that. Again, I challenge you just to really, as you get those stories, to think about that moving forward, how we can pivot to prevention. So as I mentioned, 1, assess, 2, build partnerships, now 3, we got to develop the plan. And I think it was Brandon, this is probably similar to what he was talking about in terms of mapping it. This is one of the ways you can map and develop your plans that go along with what you're already creating in terms of your implementation plans. So this is done in months. So saying September, the pitches we want to do is back to school talking hints for parents. We want to be highlighting last year's work. And the other thing I encourage you to do is to think twofold as you're doing your plan. What are the topics that we need to push for this month? And then what can we push as an organization? So we're branding not just and getting outreach engagement on just the campaign, just prom, just back to school talking tips, but also highlighting the work as the coalition generally. So we're branding ourselves. So here you see in September, we're going to talk about back to school tips, and then we're also going to highlight our work. And then what are some guest pieces we could have? We're going to be talking about changing landscape of marijuana in Tennessee. So, and where these pitches going to go depends on your target audience and what you have going on in the media in your community. So for this, it would be, what are the social medias we can hit? Newspaper, TV. Are we going to have a forum and do a press conference on the changing landscape of marijuana in Tennessee, and then talk to either Comcast, a local provider, or our local television station, are getting PSAs out there along with radio. So what are all the different ways we can layer it? October, drug testing policies, positive effect on high school. November, we're going to do a PSA release on what our city should be thankful for. So again, always looking and making sure we're building every month, thinking about this. And really, there should be multiple. This is just, it's on the screen, way for you to look at it. Another way that has been really effective is to plan out your media timeline. And this is honestly just from PowerPoint. One of the ways, this is straight from somebody I work with, and how we were able to do this, and showing this is just up until August 15th, and talking about social media specifically and branding it. Branding is so important with your coalition and with the task you're doing. So taking some time to talk about that and having team building around it's important. There's another shout out to midyear, a lot of great stuff around branding and prevention happening at midyear. But if you look, this is broken down to 12 tasks, really making it digestible pieces, right? Because you don't want to put anything on there that's going to be too overwhelming. As simple as linking the branding to the website, developing the outreach list, completing the blog content. And what I'd like you to really take note of here too is that they're talking about the idea of planning the releases with the same time they're planning the blog content and how it's going to relate directly to what they're going to push out with social media, directly to what they are going to market. So you're not doing 15 different things and overwhelming yourself. You're layering everything together to be like, okay, this is what we want to do with social media. How does that match up with the blog content? How does that match up with the outreach we're going to do for media? How does that, so everything is layered, and that you're really continuing to build on the work you're already doing. Task 12, April, is launch media. So the launch date for all the social media was August 15th. And I'm more than happy to make sure, I'll make sure Kadka gets copies of all of this so that you have it. So the software used for this, Thomas, was actually straight out of PowerPoint. There's multiple templates within PowerPoint to help you with timelines. This is what worked best for the group you're working with. And again, I'll make sure that Kadka gets those so that you can have access to them. Task 11 is beta test emails and email evaluation. This again goes into assessment. One of the things we were talking about, making sure that we got our messaging out there, was to make 3 separate newsletters and then test them within a group of 20 different groups of people. So over 60 people would be getting it, but 20 each would be getting a certain email, and then seeing how many people were engaging and how they're engaging with the email. And then when we did the mass push, that we would use the one that got the best results in terms of click-through rates and things like that. So again, this comes back from assessment and evaluating our work, making sure that once it does really get pushed out, that it is a great piece of content that is going to be engaged with and used. And so that was a beta testing the emails to make sure. So moving from planning to pitch, this is really the next steps, right? You've planned it, you know the people you're going to target, you built the relationships, and now it's time. I'm the first one to say I'm like at the very beginning of millennial. I don't love using the phone. I'd rather text or email, and reporters would tell you that too, but I'm telling you all the research I've done, and it's true to form with all the work I've done, calling them will get you the feedback faster. So making that call is so important, and then following up with email. Press releases, having that one-on-one meeting, and then of course the development of the press kits and PSAs, and we're going to go through each one of these. So in terms of the call, this comes right from 4 Innovative Ways to Get Media from entrepreneur.com, and it's the system I've been using for a long time. This was just a quick way of getting you guys to really see, really easy, making this call 10 to 30 words, the introduction. Why you're picking and asking this journalist, this blogger, this influencer, whoever you're talking to, why them to report and be part of the story. Why your story is relevant and why it's news right now. Why is the story important to the work you're doing? And then why is it important to the news right now? And then ask for their level of interest, and then include how to reach you. So if that's like include how to reach you, obviously if you're leaving a voicemail, if you're talking to them one-on-one, making sure they have your information, but really always asking for the ask. I want you to, if you print this PowerPoint later, circle number 4, ask for their level of interest, because if they say yes, good, follow up, let's do it. If they're not sure, you got to move on to another person on your list. So really asking for that level of interest, be like, we want you to do this and this is why. But as you see, this is clear and concise. They're busy too, just like you are. The less you could do, the better when it comes to this. And this is true. I'm going to start at the bottom here. If you said, this is New York Times editor Caitlin Kelly says that, has stated that 99.9% of emails are useless. And the reason why is they can't use them. And I've heard this from reporter after reporter I've worked with on several different campaigns, is the reason they didn't use the press release was because it wasn't usable. It didn't have the information or the impact. And so just like that call, we want whatever you send to me, it needs to be digested in a minute. And we're going to talk more in a minute. I'm going to go through some of the formatting with the press release. But like, it needs to be in a second that they can see what's going on and it's clear. It needs to be in a Word format or some format that they can cut and paste. The easier they can use your content, the better. Clear headline with 1 sentence sub-byline, a release date, and always include the about. And we're going to go through each one of these now. So this is a quick format breakdown. And as I said, during this mid-year bit, we're going to be actually asking you to give us some of your headlines and work through them so we can help you leave with some really great ones, because who I'll be working with is actually a PR expert, so she'll be helping you do that. But here I want to give you some examples. That first line needs to be clear and concise, and then you have that more descriptive subtitle. And you really want these 2 lines to describe everything. without getting too flowery. And this is what was hard for me because I tend to be an over talker, newsflash. And even with grant writing, sometimes we can be more flowery with saying this is innovative or whatever. Really, we need to get straight to it. So new toolkit targets teens and parents, youth-to-youth messaging designed to prevent substance use and reduce stigma. We know we're getting a toolkit, we know who it's targeting, and we know what it's doing. We need it short and concise. The other part you'll see is it says for immediate release. You can also choose to embargo it, which means that they have to keep it confidential to a certain date. We've done that sometimes when we were releasing data that we thought was really important and we wanted to come out at a certain time, or we had to make sure it was released when another stakeholder was giving the approval to do so. So you can also embargo that and put a release date as well. So the format breakdown, again, this is getting into content, is exactly where the city / county and state is up there. That first paragraph is just general of what you're about to get into, and those next part is where the meat is, and you really don't want it longer than 1 page. And I know that's hard, but we want to keep it short and to the point, and right there get really the meat of the main points, 2 to 3 sentences about what's going on. And again, there's a difference between marketing and journalism. And when we're sending out press releases, it's really easy. We want to talk ourselves up. And I was the worst about this. I'm like, this press release is awesome. I don't understand why it's not getting picked up. And mostly it's because I was like saying we're awesome and and it didn't feel like actual reporting. So we want to make sure that we're looking at it through a journalist, not a marketing lens, and saying what is just true and factual. Not if we're going to say it's innovative, then you better back up that it's innovative. We're not just using that term because it sounds good. And then that last part, excuse me, is you really want to make sure there is a really good quote from a stakeholder or from your coalition director or from one of your board members, following it up with an exact quote. And then finally, always making sure that you have the about. This is so important. One thing I talked to so many reporters, whether it was newspapers or TV, was that people didn't follow up with the about so that they had more content to follow up or to talk about, especially when you're going on the news. And so making sure a few data points, your mission is in there. If you have another partner involved, information about them as well. And finally, those 3 pound signs just signify, especially for news, radio, or TV, that there's no more copy coming, that this is the final plan. And again, really try to keep it to 1 page. No more than 2 if your about needs to go on to the 2nd page. That's really what's going to get your press release more coverage and more push. So partnering for impact. This is that next part where I want to talk about in-kind dollars and how we can do that. And when I say experts in media development, what I'm meaning here is that you have experts in media in your backyard. And you do. And again, even if it's not asking for money, even if it's not asking for PSA debit, even it's just saying, hey, listen, this is our work we're doing, and we just need someone to provide guidance or assistance or tell us if this PSA looks good, if we're doing the right thing with this release. Can you tell us what you think about the campaign? They're here and they will meet with you, whether even creative directors I've met with in big cities, to have conversations around content and the quality of the content, as well as whether they'll help us with it moving forward. So in terms of relationship building, even if you're not asking them to put out the PSA yet, even if you're asking them to be part of that content development, it's going to be huge. For in-kind dollars for you, but because you're getting expert media attention to help you make these better. As I said before, you can't be expected to know everything as coalition members and coalition directors, but you can include the people who do. And that's why coalitions are so powerful. That's why we have those stakeholders. So some of the ways to be thinking about this is PSA development. A lot of times, depending on your area, you sit down, we're going to talk about having that meeting. You can ask them to do in-house pro bono PSA work. So they're sitting there and helping you tape it, cutting it for you, doing all that. A lot of them have grants or foundations, if you ask, that you can apply for dollars to then help you do that as well. Again, talking about those multi-part stories, when you go into pitch with them and you sit down with their team talking about, okay, we're thinking we're going to show one of our people in recovery, then we want to have a Narcan story, then we want to talk about the power of prevention and talking at your dinner table, and we're thinking about doing it this, and this way. So pitching multiple part stories so that they can stream it, and even talking about them, we thought you could push it on social media here. It'd be great if we could just have a news story on your web page there, and then have a couple times where we're having an on-air interview, and then you're covering this event for us. So don't just go in there asking for coverage of an event. just asking for the PSA. You really want to have the whole package laid out. So A, you're getting the biggest bang for your buck, and they're like, great, you saved us time and money by having it all in one place. Now, for sound and video bites, if you've ever been on radio and TV, you can ask for those sound bites. They can cut them for you. A lot of times they're super nice about doing that. So making sure you're following up, because we have several of the reporters who finally just gave us the tech person. You can call directly to the tech person and be like, could you cut this for me and send it to me? And they can send it in a format that you can upload it to your medias to get it out to other medias, which is a great way to get those clips. And just ask for assistance for your own sound bites. If you're creating stuff for your blog or for your social media, asking them for help making that happen. And then of course, package placement. If you helping you develop and place the PSAs into their rotation, or helping you develop and place them into the rotation, whatever comes first. If you already have PSAs developed and you want them to place it, or you want them to help you and place it, making the ask for being like, is there any way you can get this PSA on the air, and when could you get it on the air? I've done this in a ton of cities across the United States. Very few have ever said no. Sometimes it has to wait because it's Super Bowl season or it's some type of major prime time, but asking for that rotation. The other thing I'll tell you, if for some reason you're not getting traction with your local stations, going to the local provider like Comcast, like Charter, a lot of times they can get you that coverage within the type of contracts they have with them. So there's always another ways to get around to doing this. So if you're coming in and hitting heads over and over again with your local airways, really reach out and talk to your local providers of that as well. So making the move, like when you do the big media meeting, you've gotten your pitch together, you're ready to ask for the PSAs to be on the air. These are the people you want to reach out to. So you want the journalists that you've researched and you really want there. You want to have them on board, so ask them to be there. You want the creative director and the news director. And I know this sounds like a huge push, but you could really do this. As I mentioned, it's an easy way to find their emails. If you can't, it takes a little digging. Youth are great at doing that research, finding all those emails, and then asking and requesting this meeting with these people at the table because you want to meet and say, we are blank, blank, blank coalition. This is how we're impacting our community. These are the things coming up, and we'd really like to have a meeting with you to discuss how we could partner or move forward with these things. And a lot of times putting the data of how it's impacting your community, all of those things are so important when you go to the table. And then from your team, you want to make sure, of course, you have your coalition partners. If you have a family or youth that's been impacted, they'd love to see that story up front. Several times during these meetings, they've immediately pulled out myself or the person that was with us, whether it was a youth or someone in recovery, to do a story on them right there. So having that available is great. And then any, your coalition spokesperson, key stakeholders. So bringing those 3 or 4 people are going to be important moving forward. And when you're sitting in that room, you want to make sure, you, as I mentioned, you have everything ready for them. So you want to have that one-sheeter with your coalition mission, those fast facts of your coalition. If you're there to talk about marijuana, making sure you have how marijuana is impacting the youth in your community or the adults in your community, however you're going after that. Making sure any coverage about marijuana and its impact on the community, even from other news sources about how it's impacting you locally, is in there. Your logo's ready to go. Again, the easier you can make them, the more likely you are to get on air and get the coverage you want. So having those high-res logos, making sure you have a list of all the partners and staff and their contact information. As I mentioned, the coverage in the press, both on your organization and the topic. So you're doing some of that research for them. And then all the PSAs and campaign materials that they can easily use immediately moving forward. So that they can, if it's on the USB drive, that they can easily put that in the computer and be playing that PSA right there. They can figure out how to get it into the stream of what they're already playing in terms of commercials. So all of that being ready to go for them, as well as any campaign materials that you have that they can have, that they can show on air. Any of that is going to be really important as we move forward. So task 1 was assess, then you're building the relationships. Now it's time for the pitch. The final step is to plan and execute the pitch. As I was mentioning before, you have all those people at the table, you have your kit, and remember that layer approach, the idea that you're asking, you go in asking for how they can promote this on social media, how you're going to see it on their news feed in terms of on their website. What is it going to look like in terms of multiple stories on air, on paper, on radio, however you're going after them. Remember to make the ask. Don't just hand them everything. Make sure there's one person on your team in charge of saying, what can we expect from you now? Like, is this going to happen? Make sure you're making the ask. Know that no is not the end. As I mentioned, a lot of times, even with PSA, if you go at the wrong time, if it's football season, if it is just a heavy time, whether it's just a heavy time in terms of media in your area, no is not the end. So coming back and making sure that you're having continued conversations. I say, make sure you're doing these pitches once a year, that you're going in and talking and having these in-person meetings at least once a year with them to say, this is what we're thinking about for the year, this is what's going on. And then making sure you're always following up. These people are busy, just like you're busy. The more you follow up and stay on top of them, the more likely you're going to get those news stories. And again, this is why staying on top of the stories coming out is important too. So you keep staying at the top as you see the job and employment reports coming out, or you're talking about how COVID's having this traumatic impact on youth, calling up those reporters who've worked out the news station, be like, listen, we talked about opioids last year and the impact it was having on youth. We're seeing the same thing with COVID. We'd love to have a chance to talk about that. This is what we're thinking. This is why staying on top of it is really important as you move forward. So again, in summary, the first has to be assess. Make sure that media and talking about where your people are getting their media from is part of your assessment that you're doing, so that you can make sure that you're having real impact with the strategies that you're doing, that you can find that youth that you want to engage, that you can get those adults involved that you want to get, whether it's parents getting that information at, that you can get more people to meetings by finding out who and what they're listening to, that you're building those relationships in a really intentional and thoughtful way. That you're developing those media plans, and I will make sure that you get that information. And then finally, you're doing that pitch, that you're going and having these one-on-one meetings with not just the reporter, but the other creative directors and staff to get your information and ask for that PSA to be played. And then of course, repeat. And again, great media doesn't have to cost big money. You can ask every single time, ask for it for free. Whether it's a newspaper printing when your ads about a drug take back, you should never be paying at cost. They should be giving you something off, whether it's 50% off, or if you have something, you get a free ad. Really push for that. And as I mentioned, find those other, and I really do encourage you to come to Midyear. It's a great experience. We'll talk about it in a minute with some of these follow-up slides too. We'll be talking about how to even get more of those influencers, bloggers, social media influencers involved in your media as well. To really build that layer approach, because great media doesn't have to cost big money. You guys are doing insanely incredible work. I get the honor of working with you all the time as part of the National Coalition Academy. I'm never left in anything but awe by the work you're doing, and I just want to see it everywhere the way I see other people's work. I want to be able to open any media and see the great work prevention is doing in the United States and across the world. And you guys are doing it. And so anything we can do to help you get that out there, I know Kaka and I are on your team to make that happen. So now I'll open it up for questions and answers with the help of Cassandra and in the chat box. And again, I'm one of those people, it's like 2 days later, I'm like, oh, I should have asked this question. Don't forget, you can always reach out for support from the training team at training@cadca.org. So I will open it for Q&A now.
We do have a few questions already in the Q&A box, Christina.
Okay.
Do you want me to read them to you and you can answer them, or?
Yeah, that would be great.
Awesome. All right. So Jennifer Bedoya asks, can you provide some of the available podcasts from DFC grantees?
I know of one great one, and I'll make sure, I have to look it up, but what's the best way to get that out to them, Cassandra?
So any resources you can send to us that people are asking for, and we can upload it where in the same place that we upload the webinar and the PowerPoint.
Perfect. I'll make sure I get that then, Jennifer, too, that list of DFC grantees podcast.
Susan asks, what were the words that you put into Google to look for the media stories and find media contacts?
So what you'll do is put the website, whatever website you're looking for whatever media. So if it's manchestertimes.com is a local paper, and then whatever the content is, so you say manchestertimes.com and then put a space, and then you put opioids or space marijuana or space Christina Clark, and it will show you anything that's related to that.
Awesome. Victoria asks, this is a question about planning media. If prom is beginning in May, you start with lead articles and campaign in March, and then April's media plan is prom specific. Does that sound correct?
Yes, so you want to lead up. You're exactly right. So you don't want to just be like, okay, now we're just looking at May and we're only talking about prom. You want to lead it up. So be talking about alcohol and social hosting. Be slowly getting up to that so you're getting parents engaged, getting people involved, and then doing your big blast. That's what you want to see in May, yes.
Awesome. Celia asks, is it a good idea to pitch multi-story spot during sweeps if an issue/topic overlaps with that timeline?
That's a great question. And it really does depend on your media and your local people. Sometimes you're going to get people say, no, it's sweeps, we're only doing our own thing. But especially with the more to know campaigns and things we're seeing at national level, there are opportunities to tag onto them. This is where I say, do your research and see what those channels that you're going to pitch to are already showing on important topics, whether it's what's coming up on a major newscast like 2020 or 60 Minutes, and then show how what you're doing is overlying it. So if they're talking about opioids in 60 Minutes, or they're doing that, making sure that you're showing how there's a local impact to this. I don't think it's a bad idea, but you just have to have all your ducks in a row if you're going to be doing it over sweeps and making sure that you can show how it tags in and why it's going to be important.
Celia also asks, should the information about coalition members include the organization and sectors they represent?
If it is directly related to the work and the pitch you're doing, yes. So for instance, we had a pharmacist that worked with us at Time with the Media, Richard. And so yes, we always put that he was our medical representative, and then he was also with Markham's Pharmacy, and this is everything about him. So if it's about a certain thing that makes sense, absolutely, yes. I would have the sector and then who they represent. And when you do the about them, what they do for the coalition, but also what their normal job is that they're representing as being a key stakeholder.
So this is from Jason Evans in the chat box. It's just a kind of a comment. He says, I come to prevention from a journalism background, so I just wanted to say to not wait until the last minute to invite media to your events. Every newsroom in the country is having to do a lot more with a whole lot less, so advanced planning is very important on their end.
Jason, thank you so much, and amen. Yes, that's why this planning is so important, and I've seen that, and I think because we are so invested in our work as coalition leaders and volunteers that, you know, we're like, we want to impact people, and we're getting all the other ducks in the row that we forget sometimes about this media piece and how important it is. So yes, if you already know right now that you have an event 6 months from now, make sure that 2 months from now you're talking, and then you're following up. Like I said, they're busy, as Jason even mentioned, continuing to follow up and let them know, and sending out media advisories well into advance of your event is going to be really important. Thank you for saying that, Jason. That's, yes, you're exactly correct.
That's all we have right now, unless anyone has any other questions or comments.
Thank you all so much. And I just want to leave you with a few other points of interest real fast. Again, as I promised, I was going to say it over and over again. Come to mid-year. There's some great things already planning on branding. If you're thinking about media that Stephanie Strutner's doing, there's great things. Like I said, come to mind if you want to get even more in depth on getting influencers in, and we're going to have a great person there with us who's directly related to PR to really help you. Come to mid-year. And then also, please, if you have not done your annual survey of coalitions, do this. This is a great way for us to get you information that you can get out to the media about the great work that you're doing. So please make sure by June 30th, it will close, and get in there and do your survey.
Also, another plug at mid-year, there we do have a session called Podcasting for Prevention. So that can give even more insight to a lot of what Christina was saying and help you guys.
Thank you all so much. Again, I appreciate all of the great work you're doing out there, and don't hesitate to reach out to CADCA for any of your needs around media. And I look forward to seeing you at mid-year.
And then for those who are asking, this will be on the same if you have, like, if you don't know where to find this, the PowerPoint and the recording, just reach out to us at training@cadco. We can show you where on the website it is. Also, for those of you who are wanting a certificate of attendance, you will receive a link for the evaluation after this. If you fill out the evaluation, you will then be taken to a PDF form where then you have the certificate for yourself for this webinar. Lupita has a question as well. She just said, we have started developing a good relationship with our local newspapers and they're always highlighting our events, but what do you recommend we do to get them to actually attend?
So they're covering your local, they're covering everything and highlighting it, but they're not coming. So two things: if you're not getting prior media advisories out, at least a week in advance, get a media advisory out. On top of the fact you should have been communicating with them before about it. Also, I would tack it on to some other story that you could do about why you're doing the event to follow up. So you're pitching a story a few weeks out that is directly connected to the event you're doing. So why are you doing this health fair, town hall meeting, whatever it is, and then asking them to show up at the day to talk to some of the participants. Maybe have some key people lined up they could interview, whether it's a chief of police or somebody that might be a youth involved or someone in recovery, something that tags them and brings them in. But definitely ask them that question about how they can get. I don't think there's anything wrong with just having a meeting and just straight out asking, how can we make it more of an option for you to come to these events? These are some of the things we're thinking about as you pitch those stories. So, I mean, ask, and then also be thinking about ways you can bring them in by talking about an interview they can have right while they're there that was tagged to an earlier story. So again, it goes back to that multi-layer approach that shouldn't just be they're coming to the event and covering that, but why are they there and how does that link to the benefit of the community as a whole and the work you're doing in prevention.
All right, I'm going to end the webinar here. If anyone has any other questions, I'm going to let you, fill it out either in the chat box or the Q&A. Otherwise, please reach out to us. And if it's specific to Christina's PowerPoint or that she could answer, we can pass the question along. Bye, everyone.